Well, as I mentioned, Exodus 20, 13 through 15 is going to be our guide, and these are very short verses. In fact, if you go back and look at the original language it was written in, the Hebrew, it's just 6 words. All 3 verses are 6 words. It just is the negative Hebrew with a verb. Negative verb, negative verb. It goes like this in English. Look at verse 13. This is commandment 6. You shall not murder. Commandment 7. You shall not commit adultery. Commandment 8. You shall not steal. It's just don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal. That's it. Those are our commandments for today. So these are, in the scope of the 10 commandments, these are kind of like the R-rated commandments, right? I don't hopefully have an R-rated sermon for you this morning. We might teeter more on the PG-13 realm when we're dealing with this subject. But let me tell you where they fit in the 10 commandments. Commandments 1 through 4 primarily deal with our vertical relationship to God. They give us wisdom for spiritual life with God. Then commandments 5 through 10 primarily deal with our horizontal relationships. What does it mean to follow God and be a community that follows God? Now, they kind of outline the social fabric of a community that seeks to follow God in his wisdom. So now what commandments 6, 7, and 8 are doing, commandments 6, 7, and 8 specifically, they hold together a tension that we are experiencing right now as a society. And the tension starts like this. It starts with a statement that almost, I imagine, everybody in here would agree with. A statement that most people in our culture, like you don't even have to be a Christian to agree with this. I've heard this brought up a ton, especially over the last year. And that's this statement. You should love your neighbor. Imagine most of you agree with that that's an ethic for how you want to live your life, that we ought to be loving our neighbors. I think specifically that has been a lens by how many people have responded to the pandemic in the past year. I know it is for us as a church when considering how to have services safely and how to reintegrate people into our church. We're considering what does it mean to love our neighbor while doing that. That's our ethic. So most of us would agree with that. But that's been rubbed into conflict with another major theme that's being talked about a lot in our culture that many people are feeling, which is the idea of justice. We should be a just people. We should be people who fight for justice. And sometimes love for neighbor and fighting for justice come into conflict because generally when we think of love, it carries the connotation of gentleness and kindness and patience, allowing people to be flawed, giving them space to make mistakes, and just understanding their point of view. And meanwhile, justice carries more of a corrective lens or a criticism about what ought to be done. So many people struggle to hold these two things in tension. How do we uphold both love and justice? What if our neighbor doesn't share our vision of justice? What if our neighbor is a person of injustice? They're perpetuating some injustice. How do we love them then? Here's where commandments 6 through 8 come in. Commandments 6, 7, and 8 are practical wisdom for how to love one's neighbor. They give us clear vision for how to do that. And they also are laying the foundation for a community of justice. They're the building blocks of a just society. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at each commandment and we're going to extract a justice principle from that commandment. And then we're going to look at it for how it helps us love our neighbor. So it begins here in verse 13. Commandment 6, you shall not murder. The word here for murder refers specifically to a premeditated taking of another's life. That's generally how we conceive of the idea of murder, but that's why it's translated murder and not kill. Because many ethical issues begin and debates begin to arise when we think of killing. We think of things like capital punishment. Is that okay? What about killing in self-defense? What about war? What about accidental killing or manslaughter? Those are all really important ethical considerations that are not necessarily addressed right here. They are addressed in many other areas, specifically in the law, in the Old Testament, and many other places in the Bible. But for our consideration today, we're just going to be talking about the premeditated taking of another human's life, murdering an innocent person. And what this commandment is teaching is that at the core of a community that's going to be a people of justice and peace is a prohibition to not allow the taking of another life. This is the very foundation. Now, this is motivated by the core anthropological principle in Scripture. The core part of what makes us human, according to the Bible. And we actually looked at this when we did the New City Catechism question 4 7 weeks ago. And New City Catechism question 4 goes like this. How and why did God create us? And we looked at Genesis 1, 26 through 27, which says that humans are created in the image of God. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. The image of God is the core understanding of what it means to be human. And what it means is that God has made humanity to be his representatives on the earth. That humans are going to be those who represent and image who God is to the world. Now, the Bible is actually unique in this claim. At this time, you would find many nations and tribes that would have an origin story of their own, and it would go something like, you would consider their God, the God that they worshiped, the God of their people, and their origin story would say that that God had made them, that specific tribe, to represent them on the earth. But long before Israel was formed as a nation, in fact, that doesn't happen until Genesis 12, long before there was a called out people of God with an ethnic identity, the claim of the Bible is that all humans, every single human, just by nature of being created, you represent God. You are made in the image of God. And so what this means is that no one tribe, no one nation, no one ethnicity or race or gender, not even a religious group has exclusive claim to represent God. So, inherently, because of this, every human carries dignity, carries worth, carries value, and is deserving of equal treatment. This is the foundational core understanding of what it means to be human, and it's a foundational justice principle for understanding God's wisdom. And so murder defaces the image of God in another human. This isn't just an offense against them and their community, although it is. It's a personal offense against God because they image him. And so I hope you guys have had a chance to see that we have an art gallery right behind the sanctuary. And there's a new show that our pastor of worship and arts helped curate. It's a really beautiful show dealing with what it's been like for many people to suffer and to go through difficulty this past year. There are many beautiful pieces, some made by some of you in this room. And imagine for a second that you were to grab one of those pieces of art and in front of the artist, burn it or throw it through a shredder or throw it in the trash. I mean, that piece of art is representative of a piece of who they are. They've put themselves into it as an image of them. And so to destroy it purposefully would also offend the artist. This is how murder works. You deface the image of God. It's an offense against God himself. This is a foundational principle for understanding Commandment 6. Now, as I mentioned, I've used the word foundational on purpose because this is just a basic principle. It is not exhaustive. It's simply saying to be a just people, the bare minimum is you can't allow killing of innocent people. This isn't a way to solve problems. This isn't a way to get what you want. This isn't a way to get back at somebody. You just don't allow this. It's not everything you need to be a just people. This is the bare minimum. Now, years later, when Jesus comes on the scene, one of the main things Jesus begins to teach on in his ministry is the use of the law and the use of the Ten Commandments. And Jesus said he didn't come to abolish the law, like get rid of it. He came to fulfill the law. And that word fulfill means to bring something to its intended use, like to bring it to its completed action. And so have you ever had like a tool at home and like it can do one thing really well, and you imagine it can do lots of other things, but you're not really sure how to do that? Like I used to have an Instant Pot, just made rice with it. Even though they make this thing called a rice cooker, I only used my Instant Pot to make rice, and then I had kids, and I discovered a whole new world that we needed the Instant Pot for. for steaming vegetables quickly, for when you forget to thaw the chicken, for just getting dinner ready in a pinch. All of a sudden, I was like, oh, I actually understand why this thing exists. It's more than just a rice cooker. That's what Jesus was doing with the law, bringing it to its original intended use so you could see all the ways that God had woven his wisdom into it. And so one of the main places he does this is the Sermon on the Mount, which is in Matthew 5. And we're actually going to spend the majority of our time the rest of today in Matthew 5. So if you have a Bible, I would encourage you grab it. Go ahead and open up to Matthew 5. Matthew is the first book of the New Testament. You can use the table of contents. You're also welcome to use a smartphone, Google Matthew 5, however you want to get it in front of you. And one of the first things Jesus does in his teaching on the law is he unpacks Commandment 6. You shall not murder. And what he does is, whereas the law often was only used to instruct people's behavior, it was like a boundary for people in keeping their behavior in check. What Jesus does is he uses the law as a microscope to examine people's hearts. And so look what he does here in Matthew 5, starting in verse 21. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. Commandment 6. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everybody who's angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember, oh, your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. What Jesus does, he takes that simple prohibition, do not murder, and he talks about what causes murder in the first place. Like, he doesn't just treat the symptom, the outward expression of breaking God's law. He finds the infection. Something is off in your heart that has controlled your impulses, that leads to you taking action. There are many things inwardly that precipitate the outward action of murder. Anger, hatred, bitterness. Murder doesn't begin with violence. Murder begins with an inward posture against someone else. And so if that's you, if you're harboring those things in your heart against somebody, he says, you're breaking the command to murder. Now, how do you know if your anger is the kind that Jesus says breaks the sixth commandment, or is just the correct emotive response? Many of us have been to counseling, have heard things therapeutically that say you should not repress your anger. Anger is a normative emotional response to offense. Sometimes anger is good. The Bible would agree with that. Jesus gets angry, and yet we knew he was without sin. God has wrath or anger towards human rebellion and sin against him. And so we can't just say anger, period, is bad. We have to be more nuanced than that. But then how do you know? How do you know if your anger is justified and right, or if it is the kind that Jesus says is liable to judgment? Here's a good test for you. When you are put in a position where you are offended or hurt, or we could say right now, triggered, and you start to get angry, here's how you can test it. Ask yourself, is my anger directed towards the offense, or is it focused on punishing the offender? Am I upset or angry at the moral content of the offense that's been committed, the injustice that's been done, the pain I'm experiencing, or is my anger directed at another human made in the image of God? If you were to let the law examine your heart this morning, to do some self-reflection, would that describe you? I mean, it could be as simple as an altercation you had on the way to church this morning. You could be sitting next to that person. If you are, I would ask you reconcile after the service and not right now. Don't even laugh. They'll know. No, I'm just kidding. It could be that simple. It could have just happened today, and you're holding that against someone, or it could be years of harnessing wrath towards somebody, building in your heart, maybe even numbing it. It could be a family member, a friend, someone in your past. It could be someone you've never even met before. And you're holding them in your debt by having hate or bitterness or just unforgiven anger and resentment towards them. Is there anyone you've just written out of your life altogether? And maybe you've chalked it up to some language like, they're not a healthy person. It's not good for me to be around them. They're not the kind of person that brings me life. And so I'm done with them. You're like pretending like they don't even exist anymore. Then you've murdered them in your heart. You've killed them off. They don't even exist to you. And if that's you, I want you to hear Jesus this morning. I want you to hear clearly what he's saying to you. Take a step of reconciliation. They may not even want to reconcile with you. Notice Jesus says in verse 23, if you're offering your gift at the altar, meaning if you're coming to church, and there you remember your brother has something against you, there you should first be reconciled to them. So take a step of reconciliation. You be the initiator, whether it be sending a text, calling them, sending an email. Maybe it's just something that needs to be done inwardly in your heart. Forgiveness, coming to terms with that. That will set you free. The New City Catechism sums this up really well. This is their answer to the sixth commandment, that we do not hurt or hate or be hostile to our neighbor, but be patient and peaceful, pursuing even our enemies with love. That's the antidote to a heart filled with anger, bitterness, and resentment. Now let's move on to commandment 7, you shall not commit adultery. Adultery, the word for adultery, just refers to sexual relations between a married person and someone who is not his or her spouse. So our common understanding of adultery today, and here's the core principle of this. The core justice principle is that sexual fidelity is foundational to a just society. Now, we don't normally think of adultery in terms of justice, do we? Generally, it's thought of as somebody else's personal sin that they've committed, and we know it's wrong, and it's painful, and it hurts families, hurts people. But do you think of it as a foundational principle for upholding justice in a society? Well, the evidence would actually say that's exactly the wisdom of this command. In 2012, there was a study done by a group of social scientists, had anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, and they did this large exhaustive study, and it's called The Puzzle of Monogamous Marriage. And they found that Commandment 6 to the prohibition against adultery was actually really radical for its time and throughout history. They found that 85% of human societies, roughly, permitted men to take multiple wives. This was sort of a common thing. Generally, even within marriage, sex was not seen as the primary place within marriage. Marriage was seen as more of an economic benefit. It was about having children, reproduction, and so many people sought that fulfillment, sexual fulfillment, outside of marriage and many other ways. So this would have been a radical commandment for them in their time and in Jesus' time. But here's what this study found, this 2012 study. It found that monogamy and committed sexual partners in marriage was one of the major contributors to a justice ethic in society. I'm going to read you an excerpt from this study. This was written by social scientists. It wasn't written by literary experts, and so it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but there's some really good statistics and observations in here. This is what the study said. One of the things it does is in suppressing intrasexual competition by reducing the size of the pool of unmarried men, normative monogamy reduces crime rates, including rape, murder, assault, robbery, and fraud, as well as decreasing personal abuses. By assuaging the competition for younger brides, Normative monogamy decreases the spousal age gap, fertility, and gender inequality. By shifting male efforts from seeking wives to paternal investment, normative monogamy reduces intra-household conflict, leading to lower rates of child neglect, abuse, accidental death, and homicide. By increasing relatedness within the household, normative monogamy increases savings, child investment, and economic productivity. These predictions are tested using converging lines of evidence from across the human sciences. It's just saying, when we have invested parents, specifically invested fathers and husbands, that's the focus within the household. Children grow up safer, and all of society benefits. Now, just like Jesus showed us the fulfillment of Commandment 6, the full intent of that original command given to the people of Israel, he does the same thing with Commandment 7. This is in the next section on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. Look with me in verse 27. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. This word that he uses here in verse 28 that's translated lustful intent. It describes this strong, almost animalistic desire for another person. Right? It's when someone gives themselves over to their animalistic impulses, that they've essentially repressed their humanity. In that sense, it defaces the image of God. It doesn't acknowledge that you are human, made in God's image to represent his will and his character here on the earth. Because you've reduced yourself to animal behavior. And in the same sense, it diminishes or defaces the image of God in another person, because instead of seeing them for their humanity, you just see them as an object of sexual desire. Again, we see here, Jesus is going for the heart. The sickness that corrupts the body, not just your outward behavior. And what lust describes is fantasizing or desirous impulses to act on sexual intimacy outside of God's design of marriage between husband and wife. And so this isn't just a principle for married people. This applies to single people as well. And we know this is true. Adulterous relationships form inwardly long before they're brought into action. Right? They form in the heart over time, and they manifest themselves in action years later. I have yet to meet a couple on their wedding day that have intent of adultery. Yet it happens all the time. It forms inwardly, far before it's expressed outwardly. And so this is definitely hyperbolic language. This is not to be taken literally. But just because it's not to be taken literally doesn't mean it's not to be taken seriously when Jesus says this. He's saying you must recognize thoughts and actions that precede sexual sin and take dramatic steps in your own life to avoid them. And so for us, for many of us, this is going to call us to start with confession today. Bringing to the light what's been hidden in the heart. Lust is like a fungus. It grows in the dark. It benefits from things like it that are around it. You bring it to the light first so it can die. And so many of it will begin with confession. Some of you should take steps to engage perhaps our pastoral care system here. We have many different pastoral care providers in our church that would love to walk with you through this and give counsel and do soul work with you. Soul work is where you don't just look at your actions and say, how do I cut off these behaviors? But you look deep within and say, what's the root cause of these? Where am I out of alignment with God? What's gone wrong in my life that's helping me, that's preventing me from living into my humanity and causing animalistic desire in me? And then you can find healing and restoration. Some of you maybe just log onto our website and reach out to our pastoral care team. It's 100% confidential. We won't judge you. Just be there for you. And can find you even if you need a professional counselor for help. I think the New City Catechism also sums up Commandment 7 really well. It says this: seventh, that we abstain from sexual immorality and live purely and faithfully, whether in marriage or in single life, avoiding all impure actions, looks, words, thoughts, or desires, and whatever might lead to them. Lastly, we'll look at Commandment 8, you shall not steal. Nothing overly complicated about this idea. We all know what stealing means. It means the same thing here. It's to take someone else's possessions without their permission. Have you ever been robbed? Has someone ever stolen anything from you? I won't ask the reverse of that. Recently, we live in this neighborhood. It's a safe neighborhood, but there are porch pirates. They exist, y'all. And we've been the victim of porch piracy more times than I'd care to admit lately. I feel partly responsible for that, but packages, things left, and that sort. When people have stolen things off of our porch, do you think it's created an overall positive effect on our relationship with our neighborhood? Like I had to buy one of those Ring doorbells, which has turned me into like a detective. I'm just like, I'm gonna catch people all the time. Which I don't even know, what do you even do when you catch somebody? You post it on Nextdoor and slander them. I've been hunting down my stuff on Craigslist like a vigilante. Like, I'm gonna find them. Again, what would I do? Anonymous user is selling my stroller. I mean, I've used it to justify a lack of generosity in my life. Like, I was gonna give, but now I gotta replace this thing. So I don't need, if I wasn't having to replace all these items, I could be more generous, but I can't. Overall, it's just created this distrust of our entire neighborhood. And the overall effect is that we've become more inward focused, less likely to love and serve our neighbors because of this. That's what stealing does. Stealing rips apart the fabric of a community, creates inequality, and distrust. Now, where stealing has that effect, the antidote is generosity. Generosity is a force that brings healing and restoration to an entire social community. Just like with Commandments 6 and 7, though, generosity involves a level of heart change that has to happen. You don't wake up one day and decide to be generous. Something has to happen in you to motivate that action. Just like stealing is motivated from the heart. What's the motivation behind stealing? Is it not, I am unsatisfied with what God has given me. I do not trust that God has provided in a way that meets my needs. And so, I deserve this. He hasn't given me, He's withheld from me. I need something that God's not giving me. Let's just do an example. Let's say you're in business and you do some shady stuff. You recognize an opportunity, there's some secrecy involved, and you scrape a little off the top for yourself. What's behind that? What's causing that? What's motivating that? God hasn't given me what I want. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. I'll make up for where He let me down. And we could talk about doing taxes. I'm just going to leave that there. Our gain in those situations is always at the expense of others. No matter how many times you try and justify it, someone's losing out so you can gain. And so it tears apart on the threads that hold together the social fabric of a community. The Apostle Paul provided some insight into this when he wrote to the church in Ephesus. Here's what he says in Ephesians 4:28. He says, "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands." Why? So that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Do you see him flip the script? Let the thief, instead of taking for themselves that which belongs to others, let them work hard. Do honest work, good work, live a life of integrity. Why? Because the end result is that they can share and be generous with others. It's been really fun the past year and a half as a church going through what we've been calling First to the Lord. And First to the Lord was a primary focus that we would all learn to what it would mean to give of ourselves first to God. And oftentimes that just involves learning generosity, learning it as a discipline, learning what it means to take our resources and our money and give them to God and consider him and his investment in his kingdom before we consider other parts of our life. And what's been so fun to see is how so many of you have gone through that journey and have come out the other side, not just more generous, but with holistic life transformation. That as you began to pull on the heart of generosity, it affected all these other areas of your life. As we've been sharing stories about this, we've been hearing not just, I learned how to be generous, but I learned so much more about giving my life over to God. Because what we see is that a heart of generosity, it sets us free from this power that's greed, that's enforced by a culture of materialism, that's enforced by marketing everywhere that we see that basically says, if you don't own this thing, you'll never be happy. Of course, we know that. We buy it. It doesn't make us happy. It sets us free from that. And then it draws us closer to the heart of God, and then it brings restoration and blessing to others around us. So there's got to be this heart transformation to understand God's wisdom here. This is how the New City Catechism sums it up. Eighth, that we do not take without permission that which belongs to someone else, nor withhold any good from someone we might benefit. Now, if we put commandments 6, 7, and 8 together, we get a really clear picture for an ethic that can not only make us more just, but more loving. Look at how the Apostle Paul considers them in Romans 13. This is right in line with what Jesus was teaching about the fulfillment of the law. He says this, "Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law, has understood the full intent of the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. Any other commandment are summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law." When you get a community together that understands God's wisdom and puts it into practice in their life, you get a people that live at peace with one another, even forgiving enemies. You get a community that upholds sexual purity in the covenant of marriage, celebrates that. And you get a people who live to be radically generous toward each other and toward their community. And even more than that, when you understand the intent of these commands, you actually understand more of the gospel of Jesus. You understand the purpose of Jesus, the good news that he came to bring of his death and in his resurrection. See, as we've seen, the gospel of Jesus, it doesn't add more instruction in our life. He doesn't come with more rules, more law. In fact, even if he did, he gave us more teaching and more clear instruction on these, and it wouldn't change the fact that we'd fall short. No. He came to change our hearts and our receptivity to the law. In his death, he frees us from a heart of sin, letting go what holds us captive in rebellion against God. And then in his resurrection, he gives us a new heart, and a new heart is what's needed to receive God's wisdom and to respond to it out of an overflow of joy and love for God, not out of duty and rote obedience. And so the gospel takes commandment 6, you shall not murder. And instead of just prohibiting taking another innocent life, it roots out the sin of bitterness and anger and wrath towards others that precipitate that event. The gospel takes commandment 7, you shall not commit adultery. And instead of just prohibiting sex outside of marriage, it humanizes us again to love and to cherish covenant with our spouse and uphold that as a value in the community. And the gospel takes commandment 8, you shall not steal. And instead of just prohibiting taking another's possessions, it dives into our unsatisfied, greedy hearts that desire to take what isn't ours, and it turns us into satisfied, joyful, generous people. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to come to the table and participate and have fellowship with the broken body and the poured out blood of Jesus. And as you do that, as you come to receive from Jesus his grace, I want you to bring before him what's in your heart. What desires and impulses are manifesting there. And then just let the grace of God wash over you. Receive your greatest need, the person of Jesus and his death and resurrection, so that you can have forgiveness of sin and new life in his kingdom. I'm going to pray for that now. Would you guys pray with me? Father, thank you for ultimately not just heaping more religion on us, but seeking to change even our inward desires. And Lord, that is a process that begins by receiving grace from your son Jesus and what he's given us in the gospel. And it's an ongoing process to realign us to your wisdom and your law, to cut out desires that are not of you and to lean in and press into desires that you would have for us that would bring life and joy and justice to our community. And so I pray for my friends in this room this morning. I pray if any are wrestling with the what's been uncovered under the microscope of the law, Lord, that they wouldn't feel shame or guilt around that, Lord, but would find freedom and restoration in what you've done for them, to lay all that on yourself in your death, to kill it, and to raise them to new life. As we come to the table, may we experience that now. It's in your precious name we pray. Amen.